Space, the final frontier. That sounds like cartography to me. Our speaker tonight has a unique perspective on representing space graphically. Geoffrey Mandel is a graphic designer. His recent projects in film and television include Hairspray Light, This Is Us, La La Land, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., X-Men First Class, I had a problem picking what I was going to list, Mad Men, and Parks and Rec. He served as the art production assistant for Star Trek Deep Space Nine and graphic designer for Star Trek Insurrection, Voyager, Enterprise, and the Star Trek 2009 film reboot. His interest in Star Trek predates his work in Deep Space Nine with print projects from the 1970s and 1980s. The 2002 Star Trek Star Charts, written, designed, and illustrated by Jeff, was used as a reference by the writers for Star Trek Enterprise. His most recent mapping project is the Starfleet Reference Library, Stellar Cartography. Tonight, Jeff is going to speak on fake maps, mapping a fictional universe. Geoffrey Mandel.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I do want to be your friend in a creepy way. So, thank you very much for inviting me. I consider it quite an honor. When I was getting emails from Fritz and Jenny saying, "Would you be interested in being the keynote speaker?" I kept saying, "You do know I do fake maps, right?" And they said, "Oh no, we're interested in fantasy maps. Apparently, is what you guys call them." And I've always been interested in maps. I've always tried to work them into whatever particular project I was working on. And it actually predates my college education and my career in the entertainment field. So what I'm going to do is give you a little overview of some maps that inspired me, some more fake than others, and then talk a bit about the attempts that have been made to map the Star Trek universe, which pretty much all of which I've been involved with to some extent, and then maybe just cover a few of the other map projects I've worked on. Hopefully there'll be time for questions and answers at the end if anybody has any. And just before we start, I wanted to ask, show of hands, who's a Star Trek fan? Ah, God, you made me feel much better. Okay. All right, okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm used to speaking at Star Trek conventions, but you guys are like way overdressed for Star Trek conventions. But it's like, I don't see Vulcaneers, and it makes me a little nervous out there. But also a very handsome group of people. I want to say attractive group of people. So I have a little PowerPoint presentation. I've tried to avoid too many fancy, glitzy transitions. Although it is a new version of PowerPoint, so there were a couple of cool ones that I just had to use. I'll try to go through it quickly. Don't feel like you have to, like, if there's a bunch of text or something, don't read it or anything. Just kind of go with the flow. You'll catch on. So, and I apologize for this thing that's kind of in my way. I just have to kind of figure out what's going on. You're up. You're not supposed to see that. Current slide. Okay. All right. Now here we go. And everyone can see? Good, okay. Oh, and there are some video clips in here as well. We'll see how well that sound works out. That was the transition I was talking about. That's pretty cool the way it comes down, okay. And by the way, I just want to say, I personally consider fake maps to be a badge of honor, given the way fake news has been treated lately. If CNN and New York Times can be fake news, then I consider fake maps A-okay. So, all right, I'm going to start with Treasure Island, a map that some of you guys may know about. I was doing a little bit of historical research for this, and I'm sorry, I moved away from the microphone. And I discovered that something that some of you may already know, that the book Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson was actually based on a map that was drawn by his young stepson, Lloyd Osborne. He was just working on a map as kind of a fun little kid project, And I didn't actually have a photo of Lloyd Osborne, so I thought maybe I could use this photo of Mike Myers as Simon, which is sort of how I picture Lloyd Osborne to look. You know, like a young English guy doing his drawings, and he was drawing a map, and as you can see, his stepfather came in and started writing, oh, this here is where the treasure is buried, this is Skeleton Hill, this is, you know, where the skeleton is sitting up. So basically, while he was annotating the map, he came up with a plot for Treasure Island, which is sort of cool. This is maybe one of the first times that I can think of that a fictional map became the model for an entire novel. And then, even more interesting, I think, this is Robert Louis Stevenson, who, once he had written the book, sent the manuscript of the book and the map to his publisher, and after a while he wrote to the publisher and said, well, did you get the map? And they said, what map? So he then had to sit down, read his entire book, and redraw the map from the text that he had written. And I thought that was kind of interesting because in a way that's exactly what I do. I take someone else's fictional universe and I try to figure out how that would work in a three-dimensional world or a two-dimensional world, depending on the venue. And he never really was all that happy with the second map became. To him, it was never the real Treasure Island. So it's a tough thing to do, I will say that. One of the things that I remember from my childhood is a book called My Father's Dragon. This was a great map, and I remember particularly as a kid just loving the fact that in the upper right area, there's an area where the artist says, my father doesn't know what's in this area. And you know the reason she wrote that is because she had no idea what was in that part of the map and didn't want to bother coming up with something. And to me that just seemed really cool. Like you could do a fictional map, but you could also leave sections of it like blank and like terra incognito. All right, here's another map that I think you guys may or may not recognize. It's certainly one of the first maps I remember, and I have to let the whole thing play out just because it's fun to see the whole little sequence. I don't know if you guys know this, but the pilot, they actually sing the theme song as they're sitting there on their horses. It's pretty alarming. It's like, can we just end this already? Oh, nice, all right. She was a gypsy in this episode, I'm pretty sure. So. And it turns out that map was done by this gentleman named Robert Temple, who is shown standing in front of the map at the Autry Museum of the American West in LA. He was the artist who did it back in the early 60s and was amazed to learn that, in fact, his map was hanging in this museum. And before he passed away, which was a couple years back, he would frequently go and visit, and I think that's just a great thing. But, Ponderosa, totally fictional. There is no Ponderosa. Another thing that I loved as a kid, 1971 movie, Andromeda Strain. It was an animated map of the facility, which is an underground biological containment facility called Wildfire. And it was one of the first uses of 3D animation to show like a rotating building with colored levels. Little dated now, but it just blew my mind when I saw it. It made me totally believe that this Hollywood soundstage was actually a multi-level, color-coded underground facility. And you'll notice I occasionally put names in the lower left corner. Douglas Trumbull is the special effects guy who was responsible for that. So if I don't call out the name and you see a name there, that's who is responsible. Another thing that really, really blew my mind as a kid was the Star Trek blueprints. Basically, a former ship designer and an aerospace engineer named Franz Josef Schnaubelt sat down and figured out, okay, if the Enterprise were real, where would everything be and how is it all organized? I mean, it may sound kind of a little bit trite now. We've seen blueprints of virtually every science fiction craft you can imagine. But at the time, it was just amazing to me. It just made you feel that the whole thing was real. What you see here on the left is the stage plan from Paramount Studios when they were actually filming the original Star Trek. And he found a way to take those rooms and kind of more or less map them onto plans of the fictional Enterprise. It wasn't perfect, as you can see, but it's still pretty cool. All right, now I get to see a little clip. Oh, a map. This is about the extent of the maps they had in the original series. The episode is Balance of Terror, and it's a map of the Romulan neutral zone between the Federation and the Romulan space. And if you look really closely, you can see it's like some guy kind of did it by hand. He probably used like rub-on type. That little map key below Sector Z6 is definitely handwritten, you can see. It's great, but it's like they were trying. That was the first attempt at Star Trek mapping. They also had a kind of a cool thing at Chekhov's navigation station. This was called the astrogator. No one ever really quite figured out how it worked or what it did, but he would just kind of turn it, and it looked like something that might work in three-dimensional space or something. I don't know. They at least were making an effort. Give them some credit. Then in 1978, the same guy who did the Enterprise blueprints came up with the Star Trek Starfleet Technical Manual, in which he actually tried to map the galaxy that was used as seen on Star Trek. And he did a kind of a honking big circle there. He was a little bit vague about what things happened where. If you look at the map on the right, you'll notice these are all names of actual stars, the Arabic names of actual stars, and don't really correspond to any stars on Star Trek. He didn't want to go there. He just didn't want to take the chance of start naming where, well, the Vulcan is here and Andoria is here. So that's a valid way of doing it. But I wouldn't say this is really the ultimate map of the Star Trek universe. This was intended to be the ultimate map of the Star Trek universe. It was a project proposed by Bantam Books, 1980. They sold it to Paramount Pictures and said, okay, we want to do this, it'll be great, it'll be a series of maps, a series of manuals, it'll cover everything. And they said, sure, go for it, we'll like that. And this is what they came to me with. They said, okay, we want it to be, oh, by the way, this is 1980, so I was an 18-year-old high school senior. Long story how they came to me, but they did, and they said, well, we've got all these cool things on the side, like, the shape of the galaxy and where the sectors are. We just need someone to put in the stars. So, okay, I guess I could be the guy who does that. So basically, they wanted this to become this. And that was a nice project for my senior year of high school and freshman year at college. It was done by hand with sheets of vellum, rapidograph using circle templates, a lot of letraset, a lot of format, which is kind of like sticky acetate lines. Base as much as I could on the real episodes, but you know what? There are not that many stars mentioned in Star Trek, so you had to put in a lot of other things. You had to put in some real stars that weren't mentioned on Star Trek. You had to put in some fake stars that were mentioned in other science fiction projects. I had to think of every possible thing I could possibly think of, including the names of my family and friends, just to flesh out the number of stars. Because the whole point is you have to give it a density so that it looks like a real map. If it's just a few data points here and there, it's just not going to sell. No one's going to buy it. Here's the side view of the Federation space. The artwork here was done by Rick Sternbach. I failed to credit him. Sorry about that. And over on the right, I did the little blueprinty type drawings of the various spacecraft and buoys that you might encounter in Federation space. Here's a close-up of one particular sector where the Enterprise does a lot of patrolling. Over on the left, you see various star systems. And then you see in the lower right that same thing on the Romulan neutral zone that you saw earlier. So it was kind of fun working that into the maps. That was a big data point that we could put in and make people think, oh God, they really know what's going on in this whole Star Trek universe. Last map, like I said, I was doing this from old-fashioned tables with a calculator, trying to figure out where the star positions were, and I somehow got screwed up and did this entire one flipped horizontally, so at the last minute we put in this. And I never got a single complaint, and no one ever called me up and said, what do you mean image reverse? What the hell does that mean? It's like, luckily people are pretty forgiving when it comes to maps of fictional universes. All right, so time passes. College, worked in publishing, went to film school, and then I found myself out in Hollywood, and I got a job as a PA on this movie. Is it working? Let me try it again.
Travels through this galaxy every 39.1 years. It will pass through this sector in approximately 42 hours.
Yes, Guinan was right. She said that Sodom was trying to get back to the ribbon. Now, if that's true, there has to be some connection with the Amagosa star. Data, give me a list of anything that was affected by the star's destruction, no matter how insignificant.
This is its current position.
Can you project its course?
That's what Sodom's doing. He's changing the course of the ribbon.
But why? Why would he try to change its path? Data, does it pass near to any M-class planets?
Yes, sir. There are 2 in the Viridian system.
Well, it gets close to Viridian 3, but not close enough. Data, what would happen to the ribbon's course if Sauron destroyed the Viridian star itself? That's where he's going.
This is Star Trek Generations, the first movie that had the Next Generation crew in it, 1993. That whole scene was filmed in front of a solid green backdrop, and the visual effects company put the stars in. But they did an awesome job. I think it actually holds up pretty well, even this late in the game. And it certainly got me thinking, well, you know what? I did some Star Trek maps back in the day. Maybe there's a market for some more Star Trek maps. So as a PA in the show, I happened to occasionally wander over to the writer's office, and they had a copy of my old Star Trek maps up on the wall. So that also made me think, oh, well, there might be something for me here. So at about the same time, the brain trust behind Star Trek Next Generation figured out that the way the galaxy was organized was this. There's an alpha quadrant, a beta quadrant, a gamma quadrant, and a delta quadrant, and that the Earth is right on the border between alpha and beta. And this was all laid out in detail in the Star Trek Writer's Manual for new writers coming in, and they kept it purposely vague. The most detailed thing you would have ever seen is the one on the lower right, where it's like, oh, Federation, Klingon, they're all kind of down there, and they're all kind of small. So I thought, there's opportunity here. This was also a map that Mike Lakuta, who was my boss at the time, did. It's visible in an episode of Next Generation. Again, it's not really an attempt to map anything. It's just a bunch of names from the show put in a grid in a fairly confusing way, because the idea is not to nail things down. The idea is just to kind of show the idea that there's a structure here without being too specific. Because the problem, as you probably figured out with being too specific, is if you say, okay, Vulcan is here and Andoria is here, the writers next week will write an episode where they're nowhere near each other. So you can't really nail it down, or can you? This was my first attempt. This was for the movie Star Trek Insurrection. There was a big scene at a banquet room where there was going to be a big Federation map in the background, and I kind of weaseled out and did the same thing. I just put in a bunch of names and put them in a big grid. But it definitely galled me, because I felt like there's an opportunity here. All right. This is Star Trek
Space,
Voyager.
the great unknown. Only now we're going to know it a little better. Harry?
Before there were maps and globes, let alone radar and subspace sensors, mariners navigated by the stars. We're returning to that tried and true method, but this time there's a difference.
Ensign Kim and 7 of 9 have merged Starfleet and Borg ingenuity to create this new technology. And I'm sure I speak for the entire crew when I say, thank you.
Yeah, you couldn't do 3D maps without
No.
Borg technology. Possible.
How the hell does it work?
Astrometric sensors measure the radiative flux of up to 3 billion stars simultaneously. The computer then calculates our position relative to the center of the galaxy.
This mapping technology is 10 times more accurate than what we've been using. 7, will you do the honors? We've plotted a new course home.
By my estimates, this trajectory will eliminate 5 years from your journey.
Our journey. Nice work, 7.
That region of space we're about to enter, it looks like it has a lot of M-class planets.
It does. Spatial Grid 005, primary species, the Zal.
What do we know about this species?
Technologically advanced, but non-confrontational. Their resistance quotient is quite low.
So those guys are going to be completely subsumed by the Borg soon, you can tell. So basically I thought, okay, I'm working on Voyager. They have a bunch of maps up in this new astrometrics room, this set that we've built at Paramount. I'm going to make a map showing the voyage home and see what people say. And this was it. It's kind of a crappy galaxy in the background. This is early days of Photoshop. But you know, I kind of figured out what you're seeing in the foreground, the red square is where the Voyager got transported to at the beginning of the series, and it has to make its way down that windy line all the way home. And I thought it'd be fun over the course of the last few seasons of Voyager to vary this map and show the progress being made. This was like the first attempt to actually map some part of the Star Trek universe, in my mind anyway. I then started doing little databases of nearby stars, and when Voyager ended and Enterprise started, I did a lot of these. These are maps of actual nearby stars showing Earth or Sol in the center, but totally accurate, two-dimensional, but completely accurate. These are real stars. Sometimes they're real stars that have been randomly assigned a Star Trek name or vice versa, but you know, it's like this is real space, you know, up to about, let's see, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 light years. This is one of the many sources I use, the Star Trek Encyclopedia, which has a 10 or 12 page list of all the planets, stars mentioned on Star Trek with the star date to make it even more confusing. Here's the database of the 150 nearest stars, all with coordinates. And now that we have computers, a little easier to plot them, no image reversed. And the third major database was this. These are the named stars mentioned on Star Trek, the stars that actually exist in the real universe. So these are both stars that we know exist in Star Trek and stars that we know the actual positions of. So with these, I figured, okay, we can nail it. We can nail it down. This was done by a very talented German fellow named Christian Ruhl. It was his first attempt to take that list of named stars and kind of show where the Federation would be, that's the blue thing, where the Klingons would be, that's the red thing, where the Romulans would be, that's the teal thing. You know, a great first attempt. He even went and did a little map showing the voyage of the USS Enterprise during the original series, which is sort of cool. This definitely inspired me. One thing I felt about Christian's map is that it seemed kind of blocky for space. It seemed like with space it would be more tendrily and wispy, and there'd be little interconnecting things. And then I happened across this from a fellow in Finland called Timo. I can never pronounce his last name, but Finland guy, Timo. And he kind of did exactly what I was thinking, you know, more wispier. You know, you get the feeling if you could see this in 3 dimensions, things would intersect each other. It'd look like little wisps of smoke. So to me, this seemed like the way to go. Star Trek Star Charts, I pitched it to Pocketbooks, which is now the publisher of Star Trek books. I did a little presentation showing what I thought it would be. I wasn't sure if it was going to be a bunch of maps or a book with fold-out maps or whatever. But I just kind of said, okay, this is how it's going to look. And having had absolutely no idea what any of these maps would really look like in detail, I just kind of did little thumbnail sketches. So basically, I tried to sell something that I hadn't done and I knew would take a year's worth of work. But they bought it. And I hired an artist who did a very detailed view of the galaxy based on real star positions. I started putting as much astronomical detail in as I could. This is all actual stuff from the galaxy. This is all true stuff about the galaxy. A few facts have been updated over the years. This book was from 2002, and they've since increased the count of the number of stars in the galaxy by quite a bit. The one thing that isn't true is there is no weird energy field around the galaxy which turns you into telepathic gods. So as far as I know, there might be. I hope there is. But anyway, that whole thing with the energy shields is completely Star Trek. And once again, we have the quadrants. This may be a little too colorful for my taste now, but at the time I was going for something. And showing all the same things that we have been talking about, the route of the Voyager, the time that the Enterprise went to the center of the galaxy. The Federation, you can see, is that one little tiny sphere there with the Federation logo that's maybe about a third of the way up from the bottom of the galaxy. So it's a very small area, nothing like that big chunk that they had in the Star Trek Technical Manual. Then, okay, so how do sectors work? How do quadrants work? Because in the show, sometimes quadrants would be like a small area of space, sometimes sectors would be a huge area. You never knew. It was never clear. It was never consistent. So we sat down, me and a couple of other Star Trek nuts, and we figured out what would be a good system for the galaxy. Well, let's divide it into 36 pie slices. We'll number them A through Z, and then plus the 10 numbers. So that way each one has a single digit. The pie slices, you're never going to have sectors or divisions of those which are exactly the same size because they're pie slices, but close enough, close enough. And since sectors were used interchangeably with all sorts of other terms, I said, well, we have a sector zone, and then a sector grid, and then we have a sector quad, and a sector block, and then finally we get a sector. And what you're seeing here is a two-dimensional view and then a three-dimensional view, and we're slowly but surely narrowing in on basically Earth and the few stars around it. So this is an attempt to show how three-dimensional sectors work, and that, in fact, even though you're looking at it from the top, it may look totally different from the side. This is the best I could do in a book, but I was able to do a little animation, which isn't in the book. So, in other words, what works in 3 dimensions is going to look very different from the side than it does from the top. These are real stars. Some of them have Star Trek names, but they're all real stars. And when you change perspective, it's totally different. So you have to accept that 3D maps of the universe are going to be, or 2D maps of a 3D universe are going to be a little bit hokey. That's all you can say. It also included such real things as the actual star classes. Some of you may know the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, lower right, which is kind of a map showing the way that most stars in our universe fall in terms of brightness and size. These are totally made up, the Star Trek planet classifications, Class M. Virtually every planet you saw in Star Trek was Class M, so that's why I did all those different little colors on the side. But you know, there's science involved here, and we even came up with an idea of how, you know, the various planet sizes and types are related based on how far they are from the sun, and also how large they are and how old they are. That's that thing in the lower right. It's a little confusing, but if you look at it, it may become clear to you, but I won't let you. So here we go, alpha quadrant, beta quadrant. These are the two quadrants that the Earth falls on the division between, and this is pretty much as done for the book. It fits quite nicely. This is a very close view of what's going on, and it's only a tiny fraction of the entire galaxy. The book I wanted to look like kind of a National Geographic book with kind of elaborate opening spreads for each quadrant. I used fonts and typefaces that weren't really used on Star Trek. Definitely going for a National Geographic look. And I used maps from the show for each quadrant. This is a map showing Cardassian warships' view of Earth. They're planning to attack San Francisco. Luckily, they managed to avoid the attack. It was close, though. This is a Vulcan star map that I did for Enterprise, using one of the recent Hubble images at the time, just showing, like a lot of detail, but not really specifically supposed to be anything. Beta quadrant. Gamma quadrant, this was a map that was done for Star Trek Deep Space Nine by Anthony Fredrickson, showing the route of an early Bajoran solar sail vessel that left Bajor hundreds of years ago, or maybe thousands, I can't remember, and discovered the wormhole that led to the Gamma quadrant. And Delta quadrant, oh look, I get to reuse my Voyager map. Nice, okay, great. There are little planetary descriptions like in an atlas for each quadrant. Each planet has a little description, and if anyone's interested in how to illustrate planets in Photoshop, I have a great plugin for you. It's called Lunar Cell. More planets. These are the more hostile ones, Klingon, Romulan. And I did star systems, 2 per page, trying to use, as much real scientific data as I could, even though these are not star systems we know anything about. If they're real, they're too far away for us to know much about the planets. Certainly that was the case in 2002. But, we did our best. Bajor, which was the major world in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, they actually worked out the geography of that world. So I just turned that into kind of a view from space kind of thing, because it looked better than the hokey line drawing that they had on the show. And then, the rest of the book is things like this: trade routes, the routes of the USS Enterprise, areas of conflict with other cultures. You see up on the upper left corner, there's that same Romulan neutral zone thing again from the original series. I get to reuse that again and again. And then some more maps that were used on the actual show. This was a major story arc on Deep Space Nine, the Dominion War. It's the Federation fighting the Dominion, and all sorts of battle maps were done. My friend Doug Drexler did these based on, kind of the look of old World War II battle maps. And, he actually thought things out, and these make some sense. He may have cut a few corners here and there, but... And then finally, the route of the USS Voyager making its way home from the Delta Quadrant. Each year, I plotted out the route and showed how it fit in the whole overall scheme of things. And, it was pretty hard to do, because each episode they would go to a new planet. Sometimes they'd, take a jog here or there. Sometimes they'd skip through a wormhole. It took a while. Anyway, this is the final map of the Federation, and you're more than welcome to look at it in the exhibit when it opens shortly. It's got a lot of detail. I didn't really have to make up much for this. By this point, there had been so many Star Treks, enough things had been mentioned that I could use real stars near Earth, which is in the center of that circle there, and kind of just randomly put the stars where they needed to be outside there, because there are so many stars in the galaxy. There is a star there. Even if I just put a dot there, I guarantee you there is a star there. Here's the more overall view. A couple of the stars mentioned on Star Trek, including Rigel and Antares, are pretty far out, and that's always been a stumbling block for people trying to map. I just put them on the edge of Federation space. I said, okay, it's a long trip, but people sometimes go there. And I just want to once again shout out to Timo, the guy from Finland, because that's pretty much what I stole the maps from, his work. I mean, I gave him credit and I paid him, don't worry. But that's basically what the shapes are. So this is a recent project. This was published by Amazon, 47 North, their science fiction division. They decided, we're going to do more Star Trek maps. They came to me and I said, well, you know what? I got a great database that I'll give you. I don't really want to do a bunch of maps, but I'll do a history of the Federation map, kind of a greatest hits map. And they said, okay. So this was my way of updating the map that you just saw, kind of for the 21st century. Put in Cool Nebula by Ali Reese, an artist you see whose name is in lower left. just making it more kind of cool, just nicer looking. I improved the visual effects, let's put it that way. You will see there's a kind of a weird little stretchy thing called the Delphic expanse, which is on the right side of the map about 2/3 of the way down. That's something that came up on Voyager, on Enterprise, that never existed before in the Star Trek universe, so it wasn't on any of the other maps. But now it's here, now it's in episodes, so we have to include it. So we included it. And then here's the little galaxy map, everything's where it should be, the Voyager route. So this, as you might imagine, has become kind of accepted as Star Trek canon, as what the maps of what the Star Trek universe really looks like. On Enterprise, they started using the maps as reference for writing, which was very flattering. I was very pleased. But in fact, all it did was make their lives much easier, because they didn't have to figure out. In fact, they probably got some ideas from the fact that Vulcan is now right near Andoria, so maybe there's a little conflict between those two guys. So, Star Trek, and that's the last Star Trek map I've done so far. Hopefully, forever. We'll see. Firefly, Serenity. Are any of you guys Firefly, Serenity fans? Good. You guys are great. And here comes a PowerPoint visual effect. Ooh, that was cool. I worked on Serenity, not on Firefly, but I had loved the show, and I wanted the movie to have the same kind of like detail for technology and maps that Star Trek had. And since I was the only one doing graphics for the show, I just did it. I didn't care if anyone asked me to do it or told me not to do it. I just was gonna do it. I knew there'd be maps coming up. And here's a little intro to the oops. No. All right, let's try touching the screen. This is the opening sequence from the movie Serenity, which is a sequel.
Earth that was could no longer sustain our numbers. We were so many. We found a new solar system. Dozens of planets and hundreds of moons. Each one terraformed, a process taking decades to support human life, to be new Earths. The central planets formed the Alliance. Ruled by an interplanetary parliament, the Alliance was a beacon of civilization. The savage outer planets were not so enlightened and refused Alliance control. The war was devastating. But the Alliance's victory over the independents ensured a safer universe. And now, everyone can enjoy the comfort and enlightenment of true civilization.
How nice. It became clear to me when I was working on this movie that the director, Joss Whedon, a very talented guy, some of you may know him, really didn't know the difference between a star system and a galaxy. Because in the original draft of the script, they found a new galaxy with lots of worlds. No, we can't do that. So, we had a little talk with him. We managed to get to scale his ambitions back a tiny bit. Ultimately, by the time we were shooting this, we had a pretty good idea of the way the universe of Firefly and Serenity was set up. It's called the Verse. It's short for the universe. This was a little map I made for the actual show. Again, this is one of those fake, looks complex but not really telling you anything maps. But until things are settled, you have to rely on these. This is actually all the various planets mentioned on the show and in the movie. And I had this up on the wall in that classroom scene you saw, but you never saw it, unfortunately. So these are like, the real planets that have been mentioned on the show, and a few fake ones. This was during the election when Kerry was running for president, so I named one of the planets Kerry. It didn't work out, sorry. And then, oh look, I'm reusing art from the Star Trek star charts. I'm just reversing it and putting in a bunch of Chinese. Hey, but you know what? It looks kind of cool. So you do what you have to. Time goes fast on a show. You need to produce stuff quickly. Some amazing fans got together and they worked out the numbers of the verse, what the suns were, what the planets were, where it was in the heavens. Crazy amount of detail. This thing is like a 48-page white paper on how the verse is set up. So with this information, super easy to do a map of the verse. I mean, and also, this is something that happened within the last 10 years, so I had all the nice electronic tools, I had the wonderful nebula art of Ali Reese, I could use kind of the old-fashioned typefaces they used on the show. This was a labor of love, and it really was fun doing the map of the verse. This is a totally implausible star planetary arrangement, by the way. Would never exist in the real world. Basically, this whole thing would fall and collapse, and the stars would hit each other. But you know what? It only has to hold up for a few seasons. So, and the back of this map, which you'll see is also next door in the exhibit, is this: the five suns of the verse with all the planets. And there's some nice things going on here, like all the planets are shown to the correct scales. They're not the same scales as the suns, but you can see those little dashed lines up both sides show the scale of planets and then the scale of the suns. And the distance of the planets from their star is more or less correct. You have to kind of assume that they're spaced out a lot more than that. They're not really that big next to each other in real life. They're teeny tiny dots. But there are, protostars, there are huge gas giants which have multiple moons, and you can see the moons and the satellites of the various planets are below them. This was really fun. I really enjoyed working on this. You even see a little bit of the remains of Earth that was, the Earth which is no longer habitable, just over in the corner there. Battlestar Galactica, the new one, not the old one. 12 colonies of Kobol, all with names suspiciously similar to the signs of the zodiac. This was a similar project, but they actually had figured this out. It was very impressive. They hired an astronomer. I'm going to flip ahead to this guy here, Kevin R. Grazier, real astronomer, and he had decided, well, unlike the verse in Firefly, we could actually have this as a dual star system. Two stars rotating around each other at a reasonable distance, lots of planets around both stars, and you could travel from one to the other. And this is actually something that's very common in the universe, as some of you may know. Most stars are in binary or trinary or even bigger clusters. Very rare, actually, to have single stars. So totally plausible. Each star here has a certain number of planets floating around it, and each planet had been kind of designed as to sort of echo an area of Earth, like there was an Africa planet, there was an England planet, there was a France planet. But it's like it was information that was actually worked out for the show. They had actually gone to the trouble to work out the details. So this thing is probably the most accurate star map I've ever done. All right, let's flip ahead. Okay, now we come to Parks and Recreation, another show I worked on. You wouldn't think they would have much need for star maps, and indeed they didn't. This is a map of Christchurch, New Zealand. I was given the assignment to do a map of the fictional Pawnee, Indiana. I had a day to do it, one day. So it's like, what the hell am I going to do? I can't draw a map from scratch in a day. I mean, what I could do is like a really bad, boxy map with no information on it, one that wouldn't look convincing, and that would have been fine. They would have used it. But I thought, well, you know what? I just was on vacation in New Zealand. Christchurch is a city that's about the same size as Pawnee. It had the same population. It's a very kind of Midwestern feeling city, more green, but has a nice sort of rectangular layout, or rectilinear layout. So I found a PDF map of Christchurch, New Zealand online, and I turned it into Pawnee. Thinking that no one would ever know, except you people. I changed a lot of things. I changed the names of the parks, the name of the streets. I put in the landmarks like City Hall and the new park that Leslie was trying to build. And all those ads around the outside are me as well. Fake Pawnee businesses, some of which are mentioned on the show. List of streets over on the right is like just a random collection of street names stolen from some other map, but it really kind of sells it. It makes you think like, wow, someone really figured this all out. I didn't, I just stole the map. This is the movie called X-Men First Class. They were shooting a scene which supposedly took place in the war room of the Pentagon during the Cuban Missile Crisis. They had 4 huge 40-foot by 20-foot walls with nothing on them. And they came to me and said, could we maybe do some maps? Yeah, okay. So my first attempt was to do like a kind of a Doctor Strange-loving map. They thought it was too grim. So we finally settled on this kind of style of, sort of looks like something that's maybe a little too advanced for 1962, but it worked. These were giant backlit graphics that were stuck up on set, and it just kind of made it look like it could be a real war room. And again, done in less than a week. This is a rather famous map of Los Angeles from 1932 called Los Angeles, the Wonder City. For the movie Gangster Squad, we needed to create a little tourist map, but it was supposed to be just Hollywood, not the whole city. So I took that center portion, added a few details, things that weren't around in 1932, took actual images from postcards from the era around the outside, and it looks like something you might actually have, a tourist walking around Hollywood in 1949. And you get a nice look at it in the movie, which is always nice. Also for Gangster Squad, police maps up in police stations. You know what? As you probably know, you can buy vector maps of cities, and they're perfectly nice, but they have a bunch of freeways and things on them. And we needed to have maps that were as they were in 1948. So I spent a lot of time taking off the freeways and putting on the old names of cities. Did the best I could. I don't know if these are 100% accurate, but a couple of people who've lived in LA all their life and go back almost that far said, yep, that's kind of as I remember it. This is Black Mass, the Johnny Depp movie. Big, long FBI wall. They couldn't think what to put on it. What about a map? Hey. So a big, again, vector maps of Boston. We had to roll back the freeways and other information to make them 1980. These are probably a little bit slicker than you would ever see in a real FBI map room, but it's movies. This is a movie that is due to open December 22nd called Downsizing. It's Alexander Payne is the director, Matt Damon is the star, and it's about a technology is discovered that enables people to shrink to 5 inches tall, and a lot of people want to do it because they can afford much nicer houses, doll houses, and then they're saving the environment. I think it's going to be a really hilarious movie, but when you're 5 inches tall, you live in these little tiny cities that are like little doll cities, but are quite nice. These are a couple of production illustrations from the film of Leisureland, where our hero Matt Damon and his wife Kristen Wiig are going to go move, and they can get a much nicer house for their savings. So it's like, wow, you guys have already worked out a map, haven't you? This is an actual film frame from the film. You can see there they have Tony Roma's there, they have Olive Garden, it's anything you could want. And they have nets over the top to keep what would be to the residents giant birds from coming down and run away with them. So yeah, got to do some maps. This is an illustration of how the director had envisioned Leisureland. And just for scale, those walls are about 20 feet high, but for a Leisureland person, they would be 14 times that. They would seem like monumental. And everything within the walls is Leisureland size, 1/14th scale. So maps, yay. Lots of maps, transportation maps. I apologize for the fact that the one on the right is a complete steal from every other modern transportation map you've ever seen. I grew up in New York too, so it's hard not to be influenced by the New York subway map. The one on the left, I wish I'd had more time to give it a more topographical feel, but you know what, you do what you can. And these are the kind of details of Leisureland, very planned community. There's like different flavored neighborhoods like Little Italy. There's a overhead gondola system, a lot of leisure activities. It's like a big retirement village. And this is how tall Matt Damon would actually be standing next to the pocket map. Just under 6 inches tall. And that would be it.